So again, I'd like to thank each one of you for the gift of your presence in this Zazenkai, or day of shared practice. At the Q&A last Thursday evening at Mountain Cloud, in various expressions, one question rang out as a plea, really, for some word on how to sit with a sickened heart for Ukraine. This gathering is a response, not a fix, and in no way an evasion, but a chance together to let our broken hearts break all the way open, to taste and express the compassion that is truer than any boundary, the fact of this world, just as it is, boundless compassion, excluding nothing. This Zen or Chan tradition is at root a response to human suffering, sentient being suffering, suffering in all forms. The first ennobling truth, life is suffering, dukkha, this image of a wheel that's off its hub, that's misaligned, this dukkha that gets then expressed in these three poisons: greed, aversion, ignorance, all the forms. Life is suffering. And then there's the first bodhisattva vow. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Some translations read, I vow to save them all. Sounds like mission impossible. But it's already going on. It's what this is. That vow points to the absolute capacity of this world, where one is all and all is one. This real world. Nothing outside it. This now. And yet, we have work to do, help to offer, hearts to transform. There's an exchange from the sayings of Joshu or Shaoshu that speaks to this. You can find it in different translations. Here's one. A monk asked Joshu, when times of great difficulty visit us, how should we greet them? Joshu said, welcome. Today, I'd like to turn to the indivisible welcome of the Dharma with a look at the life and work of an 18th century Japanese woman who, against the odds of her culture, became a renowned haiku poet and artist. Kaga no Chiyo, or Chiyo-ni, or Shigetsu. And then later, as a Buddhist nun, she took the name Soen. Mostly we hear about her as Chiyo. So first, a little background. Chiyo lived a generation after Basho. Basho, this towering figure, most famous haiku poet of the Edo period in Japan. Chiyo was influenced by Basho, and she studied with two of his disciples. So her work is considered as part of that line, the Basho line. And Basho, in turn, was shaped by the work of a Chinese master from an earlier time. This just struck me, maybe because of our time right now. The teacher was Du Fu, or Tu Fu, one of the most famous poets of the Tang dynasty, and still revered more than 900 years after his death, when Basho was born. Fu was a master poet and a visionary civil servant, politician. That vision came crashing down when his life, like the entire country, was utterly devastated by the An Lushan rebellion. We've heard before about this period in Chinese history when, in the course of about 1 decade, civil war, famine, and disease wiped out slightly more than 2/3 of the population. The census data before that decade and after is staggering. Du Fu's poetry reflects his experience, and its influence apparently pervades both Chinese and Japanese literary culture. So nearly 1,500 poems have been preserved by him over the ages, and he's often called the poet historian or poet sage. After the death of his youngest child, Fu wrote, "Brooding on what I have lived through, if even I know such suffering, the common person must surely be rattled by the winds." I marvel, though maybe it's more just respect. Maybe there's something telling about how Zen deepened and flourished during this very brutal, lonely time. I remember reading an article that asked the question, what do we 1 in 3 who survived do? What do we do now? Basho lived in a quieter time, a time when haiku flourished. Not only the simple form, 3 lines, generally 5, 7, 5 syllables, certainly then, but also what came to be known as the way of haiku. Here's how Justin Durrell puts it while introducing Chiyo. Justine, this is a woman who identifies herself as a woman scribe and poet. She writes, Chiyo-ni, one of Japan's most remarkable female poets, grew up in a village at the foot of one of the country's 3 holy mountains. The fertile agricultural area had 4 distinct seasons, And in spring, the winter snowpack overflowed the rivers and streams with crystalline water. Guided by the image of the translucent water and the chime of the local Buddhist temple bell, Chiyo pursued the way of haiku, merging the mundane moment with the eternal. That's how Durrell put it. Another passage about Chiyo from an edited collection of her work describes the way of haiku as aware and open to every moment. Speaking of how Chiyo embodied that way, lived that way, she observed the ordinary world around her with care, capturing its profound beauty in her poetry. Here, now, alert to things just as they are. We heard this one example earlier, the haiku I read. From the mind of a single long vine, 100 opening lives. From the mind of a single long vine, 100 opening lives. If you've read Natalie Goldberg's book, 3 Simple Lines, you've heard about the way. Here's how Natalie puts it. She asks, what is the way of haiku? Bare attention, no distractions, pure awareness, noticing only what is in the moment, being connected to seasons, unconnected to self-clinging. And then out of that, composing your experience in 3 lines that go beyond logic, that make the mind leap. In the center, she writes, a taste of emptiness. A frog, a crow, a turnip, the ordinary right in front of you is the realm of awakening. She ends the passage with this note: pure Zen, but not Zen. I can hear Natalie saying that. Pure Zen, but not. And yet, there is that beyond logic, that before knowing, that leap, the step, the falling back, a pointer to awakening, to the awake world. Here's another. Oh, morning glory, the well bucket entangled, I ask for water. The scene is that in the night, a vine crept into the well bucket, flowering at dawn, this morning glory. I ask for water, not going to disturb this beauty. Who is watering whom? And another, 100 gourds attached to a single stem. This one is recorded as Chiyo's response when the master of a Heiji temple asks her about the Buddhist teaching that 10,000 meanings can come from one thought. 10,000 myriad things come from one thought. 100 gourds attached to a single stem. Or another, from the mind of a single long vine, 100 opening lives. That, single long vine, 100 opening lives. Chiyo's gifts were widely recognized. Before her time, haiku was known to be a man's domain. Women were thought to be too soft and emotive for this heightened art form. Their work was ignored or dismissed. Here's a hint of that from Chiyo. Without a voice, the heron would disappear. Morning snow. One night, the master haiku poet Shiki, a teacher of Chiyo, spent a night in their family home. In the morning before leaving, he asks Chiyo to write a haiku on the iris. Maybe there was one there. She wrote, "Spring remains in the iris." So simple. In this practice, this sitting practice, we may get a taste of no coming or going, no near or far. One entirety, all of it in a single flower or a single word. This spring remains in the iris when he's getting ready to leave. Reminds me of that story I've told before, where I think it was at the end of a week-long session, a period of time with Ryon Roshi, so rich, and he came in to say goodbye. People were greeting him, wishing him well, and without a thought, I just said, "Roshi, please don't leave." And he simply said, "I can't leave you." It's true. Shiki and Chiyo met only once, but they exchanged letters and he commented on her haiku. When Shiki died, Chiyo-ni wrote, "Sad, so sad, to miss the plum flower before it fell." Shiki died. What remains? To miss the plum flower before it fell. Chiyo began writing when she was 6 or 7 years old. Her first recorded haiku came while she was out playing in a rice field. probably out with the women, because in that day, the women planted the rice. As Natalie Goldberg writes, Chiyo gazed up at the birds in the autumn sky. Here's her haiku. The first wild geese coming, still coming. Coming, still coming. Dwelling nowhere, mind comes forth. A few more haiku. Chiyo's. Winter wind, from where to where, leafless trees. Mountain and moor, not one thing that moves. Morning snow. The first wild geese, coming, still coming. Someone in Ukraine this week said, if you can go outside and see the blue sky, you should do it. Scott and I try to do that every day. Maybe a walk. And he's so tuned in to the birds. I've said before, they talk to him. He talks back in these bird poems. They just sort of appear. And so I'd like to, perhaps indulge this in the company of Chiyo and read one by Scott, not at all a haiku, but about geese and more. Geese honk for a reason. They're not being rude or oblivious, despite how it might appear. Their racket isn't particularly intimidating to would-be predators. No eagle would be thrown off by that noise. I say reason, and I should say reasons. Can't you feel how good they feel to fly so fast and low, celebrating their strength and endurance like some athletes on the podium, trophies held aloft? Geese know more about jet planes than you do, unless you're a pilot. Then you're pretty much on even ground with geese. Pilots know more about geese than you do, unless perhaps you're a crow. And crows, clever as they are, can't read. So I don't think so, but I'm willing to be corrected. Geese miss one critical point about jet planes. Jet planes can't hear them coming. This explains a lot of tragedies. For geese, always. For jet planes, occasionally. And metaphorically, in ways to which we can each relate. Two geese flew around us this morning in the mist, a perfect circle, hidden here by a house, twice by trees, appearing and disappearing, honking all the way. We're not jet planes, and our world is not a metaphor, so take this as a reason to be happy. A gift. We two in a circle of sound, those two musing lyrical, chose us to fly around just when we need a miracle. If you can go outside and see the blue sky, you should do it. Or maybe the blue sky right where you sit. Nansen didn't call it a miracle. He called it ordinary mind, the way, as vast and boundless as the great empty firmament. Here's how the poet Kobayashi Isa put it. Isa, who was born 12 years before Chiyo died. No need to wail. Wherever you fly, wild geese, it's the same floating world. This floating world, this luminous, transient, dewdrop world, empty. And yet, goose, wild goose, when did your journey begin? Isa writes. Where do you come from? Without thinking at all, what is your original face? Chiyo worked most of her life as a poet, painter, and scroll maker. When she was 52 in 1755, she found a couple who would be willing to take over what had been her family's scroll making business. And Chiyo became a Buddhist nun. Not, she said, to renounce the world, but, and this is a quote, as a way to teach her heart to be like the clear water which flows night and day. As one writer responded, to flow, to vanish. Chiyo lived another 20 years. Here is her haiku following an awakening experience. Clear water, no front, no back. Utterly translucent, not even a reflection, and so simple. Whether you see it or not, that is your sitting. That is you. Clear water. No front. No back. Here's another, they're so short and so rich, showing this fleeting free world, this world of things just as they are. She writes, anyway, leave it to the wind, pampas grass. Anyway, leave it to the wind, pampas grass. Penetrating the void, winter wind, from where to where? Leafless trees. I'm reminded of that beautiful line from the koans, under the shadowless tree, all people are in one boat. This shadowless tree. This shadowless tree. The poem that line is in is actually describing Zazen. Penetrating the void, winter wind from where to where, leafless tree. That shadowless tree. Toward the end of her life, Chiyo's health waned. She was by then surrounded by a circle of women, haiku poets. They often gathered and wrote together. One of them, a beloved friend and confidant named Suejo, cared for Chiyo. And Chiyo continued to write. Whatever I pick up is alive. Ebbing tide. Then near the end, my energy can only defeat a butterfly this spring morning. And finally, I also saw the moon. And so I say goodbye to this world. If you can go outside and see the blue sky, you should do it. We are doing it. Sitting here in silence, resting in the breath, returning again and again to this moment. This vertical moment that is at once completely empty and all-inclusive. This now that is as boundless as the great empty firmament and more intimate and immediate to us than we can possibly fathom. Just this. That just nothing outside it. Just this. We offer our sitting for the peace, the healing, and the beauty of the whole world. Thank you so much for this shared practice.